Hey, how are you? This is Andrew with ADS. And so today I'm just walking by the river, one of my most fun things to do, and just finished listening to a podcast episode about Kate Spade and her life and how she started the Kate Spade business. And so I'm gonna, when I'm done walking, this is not my normal pace because I'm decided to slow down to say this to you real quick. But when I'm done walking, I will quickly share the synopsis of that with you and also link to that podcast. It's a podcast that Guy Raz does with NPR called How I Built This. And I love listening to that podcast. Just great stories. I've learned about so many of these big brands, how they made it. So share with you in just a minute. All right. So as I was saying, I just finished listening to this podcast called How I Built This by Guy Raz on NPR. And he was telling the Kate Spade story, which, there's so much to that story. And as you know, Kate Spade passed from suicide this past year. So to share quickly about her story, quick highlights, and I'm going to link again to that podcast so you can listen to it yourself. Excuse me, a little drippy out here. And so what I thought was interesting about that was, first of all, she wanted to be a journalist to begin with. So Kate actually went to school to be a journalist, and she grew up very Catholic, went to an all-girls Catholic high school, very strict mom, and she had very extremely fiscally conservative values. So she was not interested in losing money whatsoever at any time. And so she ended up finding this temp job with, this temp job over at, with basically in fashion, which she was not interested in fashion whatsoever. She was not a fashion chick. It was just purely for a job. And so, she was doing this temp job, and it was really like a nothing role. It was really like her job was to tie models' shoes because they couldn't bend over in their clothes on shoots, and get people Snickers and things like that. So not the glamorous role whatsoever, right? And so that was her role. And then she became very adept at accessories because that was her job. So she had plenty of handbags and things like that. And she collected a lot of them. And she had a particular style that was very simple, clean, basic, modern, structural bags. And so she knew nothing about bags whatsoever. It was because of her soon-to-be husband, Andy, who said that she could do this business. She was like, no. So Andy was really the push behind a lot of this. If it was not for him, Kate Spade, honestly, I don't think Kate Spade would exist, because Kate was very risk averse. And so, but Kate had all the experience. Andy was actually in my world, in marketing and branding. So he has an interesting background himself. Well, long story short, they were using the yellow pages back then. This was 90s. And they were using the yellow pages in New York, sourcing all kinds of stuff so she could find someone who could make a pattern for her. She basically bought huge sheets of paper and taped it together to create the structure, the shapes of the bags that she wanted to see. And then she found someone who advertised that they do patterns, like sewing patterns. And so she started using them. Excuse me. And so, she started using them for her handbags. And they were so patient with her. She really knew nothing. She was embarrassed that she knew nothing about this world, this business. And so what she did, she basically sourced everything she needed through the yellow pages, and couldn't get a fabric shop to get them a small amount of fabric that they needed to make 6 bags, 6 sample bags. And so what they ended up doing was using, it was like muslin. It was like what you make a potato sack out of. Burlap, sorry, not muslin. And so she got the heaviest weight she could find, and those were her first bags. And they just stood out so much because they were so different from all the other bags out there. Like anything you would see in Paris, anything anywhere, you would not see this kind of look, feel, fabric, whatever. And it slowly took off. And then, before you knew it, they had stuff in Neiman Marcus and all this. But even 3 years in, no one was making money. Andy's salary, who is again in marketing and branding, with his job, he was funding it all. Just like little apartments they were living in. They were crawling over boxes in their apartments. They had people on handshake equity agreements who quit their jobs and put in all this time and effort to make all of this happen. And ultimately, 3 years in, they were about to call it quits. And their friends who quit for them and did all that work for them was like, no. Like, we put all our time into this and we're seeing nothing from it, like no fruits from our efforts from this. And so that's what made them keep going. In any case, I think that's the part that stuck with me the most, is that 3 years in, nobody was making money. At least they did have Andy and his salary. And I do see that in a lot of people's stories. Somebody was carrying the bills. Somebody was carrying the household, even though they didn't have kids, which was great. Somebody still had a steady job to hold things down. And so I think that's an interesting lesson for all of us, that, there's someone there typically in a lot of these stories that does have the full-time job that helps. And additionally, in that point of time where everyone wants to quit, that's when it seems to take off, when magic happens. When you're so desperate something has to work, that seems to be the time when you get the most passionate and the most sincere, and you start pulling out ideas and everything just to make this work. So I think that's the key for a lot of these stories. Anyway, again, I'll link to that story for you. And that's it for today. Cheers. Let me know your thoughts on that. And I hope you have a good one. Bye.